Quebec. It's how Maurice Duplessis, who was a staunch Catholic conservative, how his policies of maintaining Quebec as a Catholic province backfired and accidentally caused it to become secular. So before I start, I have to give credit where credit is. So I have to give thanks to Justin Barron and Joseph Cole. Barron he helped me short up this essay, and that's the version I'm going to present. The last semester I worked with Cope on a directed study, and much longer version of this essay is available if you just ask me after the presentation. And I also want to thank Geneseo and SUNY Buffalo for making this presentation possible. So I have to ask the audience a question. Who here is from Canada? Or who here has taken a class on Canadian history? Or maybe read a book? Or a novel? Comic book? The Wikipedia page? No. Okay. That's okay. My knowledge of Canadian history is like you. The material the knowledge I know is what I studied, and that's it. So I'm going to have to start with an overview of what I'm going to present. That way you guys are understanding it better. So in modern Canadian history, it starts in 1960 with the Quiet Revolution. That's when it started to become secular. So we took a course in Canadian history. Everyone said that modernization, secularization began in 1960. But I'm arguing it started before that with Maurice Duplessis. His views on communism and the interconnection of church and state played a huge role in how, in the 50s, there was a shift in how people thought what the church should do and what the state should do. Now, when I say interconnection, I don't mean that church and state were one and the same. I'm saying that the church had a strong influence over the Quebec government. Capitalization, lack of federal aid, nationalism, second-class citizenship, all of those variables played a role in causing Quebec to switch from a Catholic society to a secular society, which would then lead to a severance of relationship, the Quiet Revolution, and I'll close with how historians have looked at the legacy of Maurice Duplessis. So I'm going to start the presentation in the middle, and start beginning with Duplessis. I'm going to start with the Quiet Revolution, because I have to explain this, because as you guys have admitted, you guys don't know anything of Canadian history, so I have to explain this to you, or you're not going to understand it. So it switched from a Catholic society to a secular society in 1960 with the election of Jean Lesage. And Lesage was a liberal, and his idea was, let's make Quebec have more social services, let's expand education opportunities, let's modernize it. And prior to that, the Catholic Church controlled healthcare, education, and welfare. Today, the other day I was online, I read a Radio Canada, about 11% of Canadians of Quebecois know who Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are. Much more than 11% knew that in the 60s and 50s and 40s. So it's becoming increasingly secular, as many Western countries are. And historians have different interpretations of this. There's the religious interpretation that studies exclusively what the Catholic Church did. There's the role of ideologies, I'm going to get that later. But again, mine is going to focus on how Maurice Duplessis accidentally caused the Quiet Revolution. So to give you an idea of who Mr. Duplessis was and what he believed in, we're going to start with what he did when he was premier. He was elected to the Quebec legislature in 1923 and continuously served until he died in 1959. He was premier from 1936 to 1939 and from 1944 to 1959. It's much different on our government. We elect a governor, but it's not independently elected. You're voting for a party, and then if that party wins, they vote for the leader. When he became premier, he was incredibly anti-communistic, as many leaders were in the United States and Canada and Britain at the time. But this was not when the Cold War began, but the Soviet Union did exist. He believed that communism had an atheistic component, to it. He said, quote, communism is atheism, and our province is rightly attached to its religious and national traditions, close quote. With communism, it says you have to get your social services and your health care education from the state. Everything revolves around the state. There's no room for religion. And so at this time, the Catholic Church is controlling the Quebec legislature. It's telling them what to do, essentially. And Maurice Duplessis knows he wants to make it so that it stays Catholic, Quebec stays Catholic, but he wants to maintain power. So there's a loop. In order to end a loop, one person has to remove itself from the loop. And so the whole point of the padlock law was that it gave the premier the authority to place a padlock in any house that was accused, but never convicted, accused of giving out Bolshevistic or communistic propaganda. It didn't define what it meant, and if you lost in court, here was it. You had no right to appeal. It's unconstitutional at the time. It was unconstitutional today, because under the Canadian Constitution, it is up to the federal government to decide criminal law, and the provinces are responsible for the execution of criminal law. So in the states, the federal government and states can do criminal law, and in Canada, it's only the federal government. The Catholic Church controlled it in this way. This act, this unconstitutional act, which was declared unconstitutional in Schweitzer versus Albion in 1957, the church told them what to do because, according to an article titled Unbridled Fascism in Quebec from 1937, quote, the church is simply striving to make Quebec's political life conform as far as possible to the Catholic concept, and when truth is Catholicism, error is anything but non-Catholic, and liberty is liberty speaking of that truth. Close quote. You know, it's ironic because at this time, the Soviet Union is oppressing Catholics and other believers. Because according to doctrine of communism, there is no room for religion. Your God is the God of communism. But in the free Canada, it's the Catholics that are oppressing the communists. So I guess you can say they're both apparatchiks in their own way. So capitalization. So in this time in Quebec, Maurice Duplessis has allowed all the corporations that come in from predominantly America or English Canada or England. They're opening up businesses and providing a lot of jobs. This is good, right? But this is how it kind of accidentally causes the quiet revolution. Many people from the rural communities are moving to the urban communities. And when they do that, they're coming into contact with these other people who are rethinking what it means to be a French Canadian citizen. And they're thinking to themselves, you know, maybe having the church take care of everything is not what it should be done. According to the book, Prelude to the Quebec's Quiet Revolution, 1945 to 1960, a new mode of nationalism was taking place called neo-nationalists. According to the book, quote, for the neo-nationalists, there could be no liberation of the French-Canadian working classes without a simultaneous liberation of the French-Canadian nation, close quote. It combined two identities, working class people and French Canadians. Over time, these same people would advocate for major change, not only for the church, but also for the state. They would want the state to provide more things. Additionally, this also caused a shift in ideologies because not only in terms of the overall ideology, what they want the state to do, but what they want schools to do. The schools at this time were controlled by the Catholic Church, and they taught the classical education, so Latin, Greek, Bible. They weren't teaching business leadership or economics or finance. So when the businesses came in, the French Canadians, well, not only would they come into prejudice, and there was no language barrier. French Canadians could speak English, but they couldn't rise up because they didn't have the skills because the Catholic Church wasn't providing them the skills. Maurice Duplessis was perfectly okay with it because his whole goal is maintain Quebec as a Catholic province. So over time, people will eventually come to realize that neither the church nor the government is doing enough, and the only way to change is to get a new leader involved. So then there's also the federal aid problem. Under the Canadian Constitution, and when Maurice Duplessis was premier, then as now, all power is not delegated to the provinces and reserved to the federal government. Here it's the reverse. Our 10th Amendment makes it so that the enumerated powers of the Constitution are given to the federal government, everything else is up to the states. The reason they did that is actually a part of American history. In 1867, when Canada got its new constitution, they said to themselves, we cannot allow ourselves to have a civil war like the Americans. Let's just give the federal government all this power to make sure that big, huge issues, or we Canadians can decide as a whole, rather than let the individual provinces decide. Maurice Duplessis is a strict federalist and he's a strict constitutionalist. He once said at a meeting of federal and provincial leaders, quote, effectively, a province with no other revenues than federal subsidies would become a kind of inferior organism, under control of the authority which could measure out its means of subsistence, close quote. He truly believes in this. And this is another reason why he accidentally caused the 20 Revolution. Because when you have not enough money coming in to fix the schools, to fix the roads, the bridges, and he's doing it in the name of an ideology which is strict constitutionalism and federalism, and enough people get angry at him, people will say to themselves, you know what, maybe there should be a shift. And since all he cares about is making Quebec Catholic, people come to realize that the church needs to go too. Now, if you notice here, that crucifix was not a crucifix I picked on mine. That's behind the speaker's chair in the Quebec legislature. They keep that there because it's important for them for their nation's heritage and tradition. So a good analogy would be to think about is like in the States, every session of the Congress, we actually have a person who's paid by the government of the United States. A priest might say a prayer before the session begins. Many legislators do that. In fact, Greece used to do it. To shorten that story up, they got sued and they won. They said, no, saying a prayer is part of our nation's histories and traditions. Perfectly compatible with the Constitution. And then, of course, there's the French Canadians being treated like second-class citizens. So a good analogy to make this with an American audience is to say that our conflicts is race. It's always been black versus white. Where in Canada, it's always French versus the English. It's always been the way ever since there was a change in 1756 when Canada became a British colony. There was an attempt by the Brits to people it with other Brits. That failed because why do you want to go to Quebec in 1750? They were treated like second-class citizens because when the French Canadians moved to a different province and let's say got arrested and went to court, it was all in English. When their children went to a school, they had to relearn their education in English, and this is causing a lot of frustration. Maurice Duplessis doesn't do anything to bridge the gap between English Canada and French Canada the way Pierre Trudeau did, which I'll explain later. All he cared about was making Quebec Catholic. And because of that, it's going to cause people to snap and say there needs to be change in the government. So here are some leaders that succeeded Maurice Duplessis. So he's Maurice Duplessis. He dies in 1959. And so when he died, I've always wondered, he always wants to make sure it's Catholic and remains Catholic. So when he died before the Quiet Revolution, in a way, maybe it's a good thing that he died the way he died when he did. I mean, he doesn't want to live in a secular society, so, that from his perspective might have been a good thing. And then he got replaced by Paul Sauvy. Sauvy was in office for a few months, but being premier of Quebec is very hard, so he died a few months later. Antonio Barnett, he replaced him. He's French Canadian. He's not Italian. So you don't say Tonio Barnett, you say Tonio Barnett. And then he didn't do anything consequential. He got replaced by Jean Lesage. And this is when everything changes for Quebec permanently. This is the beginning of modern Quebec. This dam is $1 billion dam. It's controlled by the Quebec government. It provides electricity to probably over millions of people in Quebec and other provinces. These two are universities. So SUNY has, or New York has SUNY, Quebec has the University of Quebec system. Okay, who here can speak French? Or can at least read? No, okay, who wants to volunteer?
No.
Pick one person.
Non, jamais.
Okay, you want to do it?
What are you going to make her read?
You translated it right there.
Now with that.
Now or never. Actually, you're not. That was the message people hear it. It reminds me of Black Liberation, but for French Canada, like French Canadian liberation.
Master and our own house. Master and our own house.
Oh, that's
Master and our own house.
Thank you. And what did the church do? So I said the church was controlled. They've been in control of Quebec ever since it was colonized and became a royal province under King Louis XIV, 1664. Even through its era of British colony, even through World Wars, it was been a Catholic province. Well, what happened is they didn't do anything to stop the Quiet Revolution. According to an article called Why the Quiet Revolution Was Quiet by David Seljack, quote, the church was controlled by a new middle class of universally trained bureaucrats who believed in modernization, rationalization, and democratic values, and demanded the rationalization of the bureaucracy that oversaw education, healthcare, and social services. So what he's trying to say is, once people went to university, some of those universities started working for the Catholic Church, and they believed in secularization, and they believed the state could control healthcare and education and welfare and other things. And once that happened, the church became less and less involved in the lives of the people. So in this photo, you got Premier Trudeau. You guys know who the Prime Minister of Canada is right now? His son, Justin. He's from French Canada, Trudeau's French name. And so is René Lévesque. René is a separatist. He wants Quebec to be succeeded and become an independent republic. Canada is not a republic, it's a constitutional monarchy. But he wants it to be free from anything of its previous heritage. He ends up winning in 1976, and then by 1980 there is a referendum that does not pass. This would have created an independent Canada, but with a special economic relationship, an independent Quebec with a special economic relationship with Canada. This is kind of Maurice Duplessis' fault, because he causes people to move from the rural communities to the urban communities, causes people to rethink. He doesn't believe in creating a bridge that causes a break with the people of Quebec, with the Quebec government, and a break with the people of Quebec to the Catholic Church, causing people to rethink, causing people to think we need to separate and become independent. By 1982, things start to get a little bit better. There's a change in the Constitution. That's Trudeau, that's Queen Elizabeth. She went all the way to Canada to sign the new Constitution. For the first time, Canada had the great idea of finally they don't have to get the consent of the British Parliament. They changed their Constitution. Gee, I wonder who thought of that idea. Additionally, I read in his memoirs, Trudeau's memoirs, that he went to Philadelphia and talked about the American Constitution. He said something like, "You Americans created your Constitution 200 years ago. We Canadians finalized ours last week." This creates equality between the English and French peoples. It creates an equality between the English and French languages. It creates special education rights for French children who want to get their education in French in an English province. It doesn't go far enough because by 1995 there's another referendum. It does not pass. And it was very, very close. So roughly, that's around 50-50, 49 to 50. As a consequence of this, in some ways this is connected to Maurice Duplessis. Again, he causes a shift in people, a shift in migration, causing a shift in the way people think, causing a shift in the fact that the rest of Canada isn't doing enough to help Quebec. And from there, you have these referendums and the constitutionalization. But I think at that point, even that is kind of a stretch too far. But so, why should historians study Duplessis? Well, for starters, when they study him now, there's a large book called Duplessis by Conrad Black. I don't know if you guys know about him. He's in American prison right now, but he actually was also a member of the House of Lords in Britain, somehow he ended up in prison. He wrote a huge book on Duplessis that gives a really good interpretation, makes him look like a hero, but most people consider him a terrible premier because of his authoritarian policies. But I think when historians study the historiography of the Quiet Revolution, they should study Quebec because they're not focusing on how his policies backfired, they're just focusing on the policies that led it to be. And it's for these reasons that is the reasons how Quebec became a modern and secular province.
Alright, so we are 2 minutes. I'm going to cut all of my comments.